Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Design VC, the show where design meets business and creativity meets capital. And I'm your host, Andy Budd. Each week, I'll be talking to founders, investors, and designers about the role design plays in the world of startups. And today, I'm very delighted to be joined by Irene Au, an early designer turned design leader who worked at pivotal companies like Netscape, Yahoo, and Google before moving into the world of venture capital. Alongside her work in VC, she's also a teacher, a mindfulness advocate, and the author of Design in Venture Capital. So, Irene, welcome to the show.
Hi, Andy. Thanks for having me.
It's so nice to kind of get to chat. So, thank you so much for finding time. You've had a really amazing career. I want to sort of start by taking you back to maybe those early days. You worked on Netscape Navigator 4. I just kind of wondered, like, what was it like designing for the web at such a pivotal moment?
It felt like history in the making, but it was exhilarating and intoxicating. I had worked at other companies as an intern before, like at IBM and AT&T, NCR, and at a startup. But Netscape was unlike any other company I had ever been at. People were just so energized and exciting. We were building something new that the world had never seen before. And I had terrific colleagues, many of whom are still close friends of mine today. So it was a wonderful privilege to be part of that.
Well, I'm so glad that you were involved. I was an early Netscape 4 user as well. And so I'm sure I benefited from all your amazing kind of design input. After Netscape, you then went on to join Yahoo and then later Google. My understanding is that you were the first interaction designer at Yahoo, and I think you were one of the first designers at Google. So I'd just love to know a little bit about what it was like working for those iconic companies at probably what was the most iconic time. And what did you learn about the role of design in tech as a result?
Yes, it's hard for many people to imagine Yahoo and Google as small little startups with few resources. And by now, thousands of people have passed through both companies. So it can be kind of hard to relate to what it might have been like at that time. I joined Yahoo in 1998. They had just gone public, and I was employee number 505. At the time, Yahoo was a hand curated directory of websites. So there was a team of professional web surfers whose job it was to surf the internet and find interesting sites and then categorize them into a directory. And this was practical and sustainable only because it was the early days of the internet and there wasn't a whole lot of content around. And so you could actually do this by hand. And Yahoo had a very fun and irreverent culture. So the people who were finding interesting websites and content on the internet were also interesting and fun. So that really set the tone for the company and was a big reason why I joined, is because the energy there was very happy and joyous. Even though it was very busy, it was a good kind of busy and stressed out.
I was going to say, employee number 505, that's, in a company that kind of group scaled to thousands, that's a lot. But actually, being employee number 505, but being their first designer, that feels like an awful lot of people that were hired before you. Like a lot of other companies at the time, was it very much an engineering culture?
Well, like I said, a big number of that 505 were professional web surfers. There was a product development organization, and there were a few people who had the title GUI designers. It was a play off of the acronym GUI, although we spelled it GOOEY. And their backgrounds were mostly in graphic design, or they were self taught, and they kind of laid out the pages on the website. Yahoo at the time was mostly a hand curated directory of websites, as I said, but they were just starting to go into personalized services and products. So they had just acquired 411, which became, they had Rocket Mail, which became Yahoo Mail. And they had just launched My Yahoo. So the boss who hired me, David Shen, who is still one of my best friends today, he had worked at Apple and was very familiar with their human interface design team and felt that Yahoo could benefit by having somebody with that kind of background to help kind of methodically develop products that were easy to use and useful and desirable. So he was looking for someone with a background in human-computer interaction. So I was brought on to kind of build that practice, the human-centered design practice. So yeah, it was exhilarating and fun, very fast paced. And the product managers at the time, they were called producers because Yahoo is following a media model. And they were the ones who were kind of coordinating the production of these products on the web, like Yahoo Maps or Yahoo Sports or various products like that. But there wasn't like a disciplined way of kind of watching people, understanding their behavioral patterns, their motivations, and their thought patterns to kind of design the experience that worked the way they worked. So that was the opportunity for me to kind of bring that practice into Yahoo.
I think when I started, a lot of my digital work was inspired by the BBC and Channel 4 and TV companies in the UK. So I'm also really used to the kind of the term producer. And I actually really enjoyed the producer role. It's slightly different to a product manager these days and slightly different to designer, but I think there was a nice kind of camaraderie that came with that kind of a producer role. I'm curious. You started as designer number one, like interaction designer number one. By the time you kind of left, how many designers were you looking after?
Oh, I think we had probably 250 to 300 designers. And that included interaction designers and visual designers and user researchers and front end developers.
Wow, so that's a huge amount of scaling. That must have took a lot of effort scaling your own leadership skills, your own managerial skills. So I'm curious because you then went back into the bear pit, I guess, and you did exactly the same thing, arguably, with Google. So you joined and you were one of the first designers at Google. Is that correct?
So, yeah, I mean, I kind of joke that my time at Yahoo was more like being at three different companies during the span of 8 years that I was there, because I was there during the dot-com boom in the late 90s, the bust after 2001, and then kind of the Web 2.0 rebirth starting around 2005. And during that rebirth, actually during these three different phases, the leadership of the company changed, the approach, the focus changed, the way the company was structured, having different business units with different P&Ls also changed. And with that, with the changing incentive structures, it also caused the products to be kind of designed the way the company was organized, unfortunately. And along the way, there was the rise of Google, which we were all fascinated with. And we were so curious about Google. And on the personal side, my husband at the time had joined Google. He left Yahoo to go to Google, and he would come home talking about the amazing culture, the food. He never talked about what they were doing internally because I was kind of part of the enemy there. And he said, you should just see for yourself. And coincidentally, I got recruited to run the design team at Google. So at the time that I joined in 2006, there was a design team. They were the UI team, the user interface design team. And it was comprised of about 60 designers. Most of them were fresh college graduates. Many of them came from Carnegie Mellon. And then there were about 40 usability analysts who were mostly doing like Jacob Nielsen style usability like design QA. But the opportunity was to kind of change the way the team worked with product development so that they wouldn't be spread so thin. They could be involved earlier in the process. The way the team typically engaged at the time that I joined, it would be something like, an engineer would come up with a prototype for some interesting idea, and they would come to the manager of the design team at the time, Jen Fitzpatrick, who is still an executive at Google now. And the designers would be called in to kind of clean up the prototypes that the engineers had conceived. And there was just so much opportunity to kind of insert design at earlier stages of product conception to, really unleash the power of the technology that the engineers were building to make them more interesting and useful for people.
I'm curious, like during your time both at Yahoo and then at Google. Can you think of an instance where like design and engineering sort of clashed? And can you tell a little bit about how you sort of resolved those kind of challenges? Because again, my understanding is that both of those companies were very sort of heavy engineering cultures. And so I'm imagining to some extent maybe design didn't have quite the same level of status or power. So yeah, I'd love to hear a story that kind of, described one of those situations.
I think of it less as a clash, but more of an opportunity to educate. So, for instance, at Yahoo, it was very producer driven. The producers would come up with the ideas for the products. They would come up with the initial wireframes and flow diagrams, and they didn't really know how to engage with someone like me because they had never worked with anyone like me before. So there, I felt like the opportunity was to show them how users might react or might interact with these products, how they might want to use these products. And so I set up a makeshift usability lab at Yahoo. I didn't have any budget, so to speak, so I just took over 2 conference rooms, and this is before we had Wi-Fi everywhere. So I was very scrappy and, got a couple of computers together, some TV monitors, a video camera, threw the video cable over the wall and through the ceiling and threaded it through so that I could have an observation room right next to the participant room. And the goal was just to show people how are people using Yahoo for the products that we were designing and conceiving, like Yahooligans or Yahoo Shopping. How might people move through the experience and how might we make it easier and better for them? And that was really riveting for the team because they had never had the opportunity to watch people use their products before. And once they could see the frustrations or the challenges or the opportunities, that created an opening for me to engage with them at a different level, which is like, how should we move people through this experience? How should we structure it? And that's when they really saw the value of working with me. So it went beyond like, oh, we need help coding up these mock-ups to like, what should this product be and how should we move people through the experience? At Google, it was a different kind of opportunity because there was an abundance of usability testing. By 2006, when I joined Google, there was an abundance of usability testing. There was abundance of A/B testing, but the opportunity there was to, move the design team's efforts upstream, but we had to do it in a different way. At that time, user research was not the Trojan horse at Google, but the opportunity was in the power of the prototype, or the ability to like build an empathetic understanding of users within the engineers. So Larry at the time actively controlled the ratio of engineers to everyone else at Google. So by definition, I would never be able to hire enough designers and researchers to keep up with the pace of hiring in engineering. So I had to take a very different approach, which would be how do we bring the user research to the product managers and the engineers? How do we help the engineers understand what users' behavioral patterns are and what their needs are so that we can collectively conceive of a better way to build technology that would serve people and their needs? So that's when we started playing around with, it's known now as design sprints. There wasn't such a thing back then. Actually, Jake Knapp's work was kind of a descendant of the work that we did at Google, which was to kind of take engineers and product managers and designers out into the field. We started with some key projects in Africa and also in the ads research area, and then we structured workshops after taking them out into the field to help them with product ideation and conception, and then carrying it through prototyping and testing and iterative design and evaluation. And it's not like people had never done this before in the industry, but what was unique and interesting about what we were doing at Google is that we were productizing that process. We were structuring it. We were making it a repeatable, scalable process. We had a train the trainers program. We kind of saw the emerging job responsibilities of user researchers, which I had rebranded. They were formerly usability analysts. We rebranded them to be user researchers change the pay grade and everything. So that facilitation was also an increasing part of their job role. It wasn't enough to just do the research, but they had to kind of lead people through the act of creation as well. So it was, the research is just a means to an end and not the end itself. And so eventually that became what we now know as design sprints, which is a very, repeatable 1 week process, outside of the research. But that was something that was very novel and impactful at Google at the time.
I mean, I love you bringing up Jake Knapp. I'm a huge fan of Jake, and he's actually going to be on the show later on in the series. So, I'm sure we'll dive into the kind of the role and impact that design sprints had. But it was definitely huge. And like you say, it was a way of productizing something that was a bit kind of squishy and conceptual in the form of design thinking, and you're putting it into this really tight, like week-long cycle. I also really loved your example around what you did at Yahoo, kind of this whole kind of seeking forgiveness, not permission. As well as being a VC, I also coach design leaders. And to this day, design leaders are still coming to me saying, look, Andy, I can't get buy-in for user research. I can't convince my bosses that it's important, even though this is stuff that we've all been doing the last 15 or 20 years in big companies. But my answer is pretty much the same as you, is don't sit around and ask for permission. Like, you can grab a clipboard and a laptop and go and sit in a cafe and offer people like free Amazon gift vouchers if they'll come and test your product. You can, like you say, you can rig up a really simple usability testing lab with a couple of cameras or phones or whatever. And so, like, actually there's very little infrastructure that's needed. And once people start seeing the results of people interacting with their product, often the scales come across their eyes and like, oh my God, we need to do more of this. It's such a simple way of getting really useful kind of qualitative insight. So amazing that you were doing it, right from the start of Yahoo, and amazing that people are still kind of struggling with that. Now, obviously, both at Yahoo and Google, you were, towards the end running kind of pretty large teams in a really high impact and probably quite high stress environment. I'm just curious, like, how that kind of overlapped with your interest in kind of mindfulness. I know that you're kind of a real big sort of mindfulness and yoga sort of practitioner. So how has that impacted your sort of leadership skills and style? Like, how do you use that to kind of be calm and level under pressure?
Well, I mean, it has helped in so many ways. At the most fundamental level, my daily practice really helped me gain internal strength and fortitude, the ability to stay calm or to see things more clearly as they are, as I'm a participant and a witness to whatever is happening. It has allowed me to respond rather than react. So there's a profound shift internally. There's also a profound shift in terms of just being able to see more clearly what's happening with interpersonal team dynamics. I was just chatting with a friend yesterday who was remarking that the work itself is easy, but it's the dealing with the other people that's the hardest part. And I find that to be absolutely true, especially as I work with so many startups. What happens when you get multiple people together and there are different egos at play or competing ideas or a lack of clarity around the vision or communication. And being able to navigate those challenges just requires all those skills that I mentioned that a regular contemplative practice kind of helps strengthen and build.
Do you, these days, you work with a lot of founders, and we'll get on to in what role as a second, but do you find that that's mindfulness is something that founders can benefit from as well? I'd love to hear, how.
Okay. Well, for the same reasons that I talked about how contemplative practices benefited me, regular practice benefits everyone in the same way. You are able to regulate your nervous system more effectively. You're able to see yourself more clearly. It's a practice of self-reflection, which helps you become better because it's a regular practice of just looking within and seeing where the gaps are and where the opportunities are. It's a practice of self-reflection and self-awareness. These practices also help build social awareness. And so to the extent that it helps people navigate interpersonal conflicts and skills, that's incredibly helpful for founders and leaders. So, it's there's no downside.
I mean, look, I totally agree. I mean, I think, being a founder can be an incredibly stressful role. And I think having an ability to kind of manage your kind of stress response can be really, really important. I think meditation can really help there. I think, like you say, it's also self-reflective. I think also a lot of founders don't quite understand how they present and how they impact other people. And so being able to kind of have a bit of kind of internal inquiry and seeing how they respond to stimuli and situations and be able to kind of manage that response better, I think can be beneficial to everyone that's sort of around them as well. So I think meditation, mindfulness, a coaching practice are all incredibly helpful tools that can help founders deal with the
Absolutely.
challenge
And
of the role they find.
that's actually just level one. I mean, at a much deeper level, if you think about the extent to which the products that we make and the companies that we build are reflections of the leaders who create them, it is really incumbent upon leaders. It's kind of their responsibility to improve themselves, because whatever energy they're putting out through their company, through the products that they make, that energy is getting transmitted to everyone else. You think about how, like, user interfaces, for example, so many interfaces are kind of a reflection of the company's organizational structure. Or, I mean, I have this post that kind of went viral many years ago called "UX is a canary in a coal mine," and it's kind of like the culmination of your strategy or lack thereof, or the quality of your talent or lack thereof, or your ability to execute, the organization, the vision. Like, everything gets manifested in the user interface. This is why so many stakeholders might say, oh, well, we have a terrible design. It's the designer's fault. A lot of times it can be the designer's fault. It can be a lack of talent or whatever. But even more often the case, that interface or that experience is a reflection of what's going on inside the company and the people who are running it. So the extent to which, uh, if leaders can be more clear in their vision, more purposeful and intentional in terms of who they're serving and why and how, and then navigating through the people issues that often get in the way, that's only going to serve the company and the products, and ultimately the people that are using those products.
I mean, I work with a lot of founders, and I find that there's often an interesting kind of switch that happens. Maybe somewhere between kind of Series A, Series B, whereby prior to that, all of the problems they see as being external. I can hire my way out of this problem. I can grow my way out of this problem. At some stage, they have let three or four people in a particular role go, and nothing's changing. And suddenly they start to think, oh, maybe the challenge is not externally. Maybe it's something that I'm doing. Maybe it's me. And often, like, once they get into a certain size and scale of company, it's really them that they're working on, and the work that they do on themselves can have a massive impact on everybody else around them. And so it's really fascinating, this shift from external to internal, because leading a team of 10 people is very different to leading a team of 100 or 1,000 or 5,000. And at some stage, you have to kind of scale yourself. And that's really difficult unless you do that hard sort of inquiry and personal work. So I'm totally with you there. So we sort of touched on it a little bit. You were working, managing really, really large teams in very well-known companies. I mean, that could have been it. That could have been the end of your career. You could have quite happily stepped away and retired, having charted the path of two massive kind of design organizations. But you've had a kind of a second career after design leadership, which is obviously the VC world. So I'm just curious, like, what drew you into the world of VC rather than just having another design leadership job? And, like, why did you go into the particular kind of like fund that you found yourself working in?
Well, towards the end of my time at Google, I was increasingly getting inquiries from entrepreneurs, investors, and executives I had worked with before who had then become entrepreneurs or investors themselves. So many people were coming to me asking me for advice for their companies or their investments. And the questions were quite far ranging, but the sum of all those conversations was just worth so much of my time that I felt like there's a clear opportunity here. And I thought that working inside venture capital would be an interesting way to do that. So I actually met with many VC firms up and down Sand Hill Road, kind of pitching this idea I had. And coincidentally, around the same time, Vinod Khosla also identified this opportunity. He saw through his portfolio companies that there was an increasing need to invest in design and that that would bring them a competitive advantage. And so he saw the opportunity for an operating partner in his firm to coach and advise and mentor these CEOs as well as the designers being hired into those companies. So it was a nice intersection between what he saw and what I could offer. He actually tried to recruit me around the same time that I had decided to join Trinity Ventures as an entrepreneur in residence. And around the same time, I also had been chatting a lot with Sebastian Thrun, who had founded Udacity, about working at his startup. I was reluctant to go full time into a startup, but he was so deft at kind of convincing me. I first started out part time. And so I was working part time at Udacity at the same time that I was at Trinity Ventures. And it was really interesting for me to be on both sides of the table. Udacity had just raised its Series A. They had about 20 people with $20 million. I can't remember the exact number, but I think that's maybe the size of the, it might have been 100 million. I don't know. It was probably closer to 20 or 25 million. At the same time, I was at Trinity Ventures and I was working with the investing partners to hear pitches and decide whether to invest in them or not. And then I was also working with the founders in their portfolio. And I learned a lot about myself. I often think of that 3-month period that I was at Trinity as kind of a way to prototype this vision I had for what it would be like for me to work in venture capital. And I learned a lot of things about myself, namely that I really did not like investing. I am an operator. I like building teams. I like thinking about product. I don't like listening to pitches all day and then coming home every day thinking like, okay, we said no to 99% of the companies. And of course, the really good ones are very easy to identify. The really bad ones are easy to identify. It's the squishy middle that is so painful. But I felt like I wasn't really creating or working with teams in the way that fed me. So I
Mm.
increasingly spent more time at Udacity. And that was a really interesting journey as well because we were reinventing higher education. Udacity started with Sebastian putting his computer science course online. He was inspired by Saul Khan from Khan Academy. And we saw an explosion of users practically overnight without a really clear vision for what kind of business or what kind of product we were creating. And that was such an interesting, formative, pivotal time because as much as I had worked at major companies like Netscape, Yahoo, and Google in the early days, Udacity was even more raw, which was so fun. And it was also a really great. I mean, it wasn't that intentional. It wasn't like I masterminded, like I'm going to go work at a startup before I work in venture capital. But it was just this happy journey that I took because actually working in such an early stage startup really helped build the skills and the empathy within me and better equipped me to work with startups as I moved into venture capital. So, long story short, once we identified product market fit at Udacity and started to craft out like what the user experience would be, the challenges that laid ahead were very similar to the challenges that I had already kind of dealt with at Yahoo and Google, which was to build out the product, build out the team, scale it, etc. And so that's when I felt like, well, I'm just going to take a step back here and take some time off because I was ready for a new and different kind of challenge. And interestingly, like 2 or 3 weeks after I left Udacity, Vinod called me out of the blue and was like, now are you ready to join me? And so it's just really interesting how, timing can be so magical sometimes that you kind of wonder like like this must be meant to be. So that's when I joined Khosla Ventures full time. He had tried to recruit me as I was leaving Google, but I had already committed to Trinity and Udacity at the time. So we had kept in touch, and that's how that evolved.
Amazing. I mean, you mentioned a few things that really resonated with me there. I mean, I think also, I was a designer that's moved into the VC world. I was having lots of people reaching out for my input and help, and it was actually much easier to be able to help lots of people in a small way, through maybe coaching, advisory work, and investing. But at the same time, I also started as a entrepreneur in residence. A lot of people do. That's how they break into VC. You do a little 3 month kind of stint, and then you get a feel for it. People see, what you can bring to the table, and then you end up, journeying as a more senior, sort of serious kind of partner. And so you went through that process. You talked to a lot of other designers that transformed into VCs. In fact, you wrote a book with O'Reilly about it. Like, how did the book come about, and what did you learn through the process of writing a book about designing VC?
Well, O'Reilly approached me. They thought, oh, this looks like it's starting to become a thing because there are a few more designers who are moving into venture capital. Give us a peek behind the curtain and tell us what that is like. So I kind of created a list of like most frequently asked questions and also like just whatever I was curious about, and use that opportunity to connect with my colleagues at other VC firms to compare notes. I didn't think that I could just write about my own experience without acknowledging or recognizing what was happening inside other firms, because these VC firms, a lot of them act as small businesses in some way. I mean, some of them are more corporate, like Andreessen Horowitz, but they all have their own quirks and personalities and values and priorities and different ways of operating. So that in turn means that the designers at those VC firms were operating in different ways. And I mean, a decade later, I think there's actually more similarities than there are differences, and I'm happy to talk about that too. But it was interesting to kind of compare notes and document it.
I mean, I think when you did your book, there were probably only about 30 or 40 people who had made that transition, and I think you've probably spoken to most of them.
Even less. It might have been 10. 10 at most. Yeah. Maybe 5.
Yeah, wow, okay. I mean, it feels like there's a few more now, but maybe it's not that much bigger. Maybe it's sort of doubled or tripled. But it definitely feels like more people. I mean, again, I think you were an inspiration for me to move from design to VC. I think it's really important having people that have gone down the route before. People like you, people like Jeff Veen. It kind of suddenly makes something real and tangible. And so I think your book and having chats with you has been really, really helpful to me. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I know you said that you started doing involved in the pitching, but you've moved more to, like, I guess a post investment support. But do you still involve yourself in much pitching? And because I guess I was wondering, like, how has your design background influenced the way you assess a startup's kind of potential for success, or indeed a founder's potential for success?
Well, I just want to take a step back and clarify that there are many different ways that designers can be involved in venture capital. There's kind of a range. I mean, there's one category which is designer turned investor. So I would put you in that category. I would put Jeff Veen in that category. There is another role which is like designer as operating partner. And that would be like me or Jake Knapp, James Buckhouse, people who work inside venture capital firms whose role it is to work with the portfolio companies once an investment has been made. So they're not directly responsible for investing decisions, but they're operators. And because they're operators, they work with the companies to help them be successful. And then the third category would be designer inside a venture studio. So this might be like an incubator, or some venture capital firms have like a studio inside where they kind of incubate new companies. Sutter Hill is an example of that. Luke Wroblewski is there running a venture studio, and they are really kind of working as part of a cross-functional team to conceive and build new and interesting companies. So Sutter Hill incubated Snowflake, for example. They've have proven track record of incubating successful companies inside their studio. I think that was before Luke joined. But in any case, those people are builders. So it's important to keep in mind the different ways in which designers can be working in this ecosystem. And I think once you understand that difference, then I can answer the question a little bit of a different way. So I don't personally invest on behalf of Khosla Ventures. My husband and I do a lot of angel investing. I would say he and I have different kinds of criteria that we look at, but ultimately we're investing in the CEO. The idea, the pitch is only part of it, but we also recognize that for early stage startups, there can be pivots. So the idea can change, but what's really enduring is the CEO. They have to be the kind of person that everybody wants to work with. They have to be able to build and lead a strong performing team. They also have to have the self-awareness and be able to set the ego aside to kind of navigate the challenging people issues, as well as being realistic about, like, is this working or not? So not being too attached, not being too tied to something. Like we're looking for people who are not stuck. We're looking for people who can think very flexibly and be very open-minded, but also very smart, can get things done, can lead other people. I would say that at Khosla Ventures, I have a lot of discretion in terms of deciding who I spend a lot of time with. So there's some things that I do that benefit the whole portfolio. Maybe it's like infrastructure that benefits the whole portfolio. But then there are other times where I spend a lion's share of my work on a few companies where I feel like I can make a meaningful difference. And a lot of that depends on the openness of the CEO. How interested and open and willing and curious are they in having my involvement? And the degree to which I can help and be effective. So that's really all I'm looking for, is I'm gauging the energy of the CEO. And, I'll talk to anybody who wants to talk to me, but, it really depends on what the issue is and what's getting in the way of their success, that I feel like I can be the most helpful when I assess that.
I mean, I think you've mentioned a bunch of really important things there. I think the first thing is a lot of founders think that VCs are just assessing the idea. But you're absolutely right. The idea is likely to change. Either it's likely to morph and change organically, or it might be a complete pivot. And when that happens, like, you want someone that has that kind of flexibility you talked about, that has that kind of curiosity, that has a growth mindset. And so I think, when people are sharing their pitch decks or their ideas, actually it is important to share yourself with it and not be too focused on this being the best idea that's ever come about. So I think you're absolutely right there. I think you're also right that, like, design in VC, it can be as an investment partner, it can be as an operator. I tend to be actually probably 70-80% of my time is post-investment, like you, when I'm actually kind of helping those founders who we have invested in, solve some of the problems and the challenges that you're facing. I'm sure we'll get on to. But I do also get to sit in pitches and sort of discuss, whether we think that this is a really interesting idea or not. And I found my kind of design thinking, and particularly my kind of my understanding kind of user behavior, really, really useful, because I think I have an ability to look at things from a beginner's mind. I have an ability to empathize, not just, I think a lot of people, when they're judging something, they might judge it from a financial perspective or a technological perspective, but whether the product actually is going to hit home, whether it's going to resonate with people, whether you could imagine people actually using this new tool that people are developing. I think having that kind of beginner's mind that a designer can bring, not exclusively designers, but designers are really good at that, I think can be really beneficial.
Absolutely. I think Khosla Ventures tends to prefer companies that are solving hard problems with hard tech. So while we do have some portion of our investments are consumer facing, quite a few are B2B, and then even more are just like really hard tech, like Rocket Lab or Lanza Tech, or there's a company that's building like a Mach 9 airplane that's going to get you to London from New York in 90 minutes, or things like that. So yes, you can use your understanding of users to assess companies and the opportunities that they see, and sometimes you can't. And so, like, a lot of times what I see is the chance to teach the companies how to build those muscles within themselves so that they can kind of get to the right idea faster.
Another thing you said, which I think is really interesting, that maybe a lot of people that never raised funding or had a VC would imagine, I think a lot of people think that VCs can be dictatorial and like you sign up and you work with a fund and they almost like tell you what to do. But you've kind of indicated it's more of a service. Like you're there. Like if your companies that Khosla have invested in are curious around design, they can kind of reach out to you and ask for help, and you can scale that up as much as you want. But you're not running around kind of sort of telling people how to behave or how to grow their company or how to treat design. You really are just there as a value add, arguably, for the people who are interested. I know that's how I operate. Like I have some people who are reaching out to me all the time because they find what I do really valuable, and other founders who are just kind of like wound up and go. And I might speak to them once a month on a monthly update just to kind of a little check-in to see how things are going. So I think we're in sort of very similar situations. I guess I'm curious, for the people that come to you looking for help, what are the kind of the common patterns that you see emerging? What are the things they want to learn about design? What are the common mistakes or misunderstandings they have about design? And where do you find yourself being able to add the most value?
I just try to meet people where they're at. And I would say 80 to 85 to 90% of the time, the first conversation is very tactical. It's usually like, do you know anyone I can hire? Or how do I build design capabilities? Or can you tell me what's wrong with my product? Or we have an opportunity to launch next week because our founder is going to be on some show and we're going to be driving a lot of traffic to our site next week. So how should we think about this? It's very immediate and tactical. And so I just try to meet them where they're at and build a relationship. And once that's established, then there's the opportunity to get deeper. And I think it's very important to not be too, dictatorial. First of all, that's not my style, but I also find that never works, neither as a large organization leader, neither as a parent, neither as a yoga teacher, and certainly not as an operating partner inside a venture capital firm. It never really works to kind of be too prescriptive about how one should behave oneself. So, it's like I'm meeting people where they're at and I'm coaching. I'm helping them be the best versions of themselves, whether it's at a personal level or at a company level. With DoorDash, for example, once I installed the leadership and kind of worked through some of the early operational issues, when that person left, then they had a big hole in the organization and I installed the next person. And then that focus was about scaling, but they kept asking me questions about like, can you tell us what other companies have done in the way of, it was like, creating a culture of customer obsession or something like that. And my feeling is that it's always better for the organization or for the individuals to discover that within themselves than for an outsider to come in and tell them, you should be doing X, Y, and Z. I mean, certainly there are times when I will do that. And so, it depends on the context. But in the case of something like company culture or vision or things like that, the answer lies within themselves. So then instead of coming in and giving a talk about how other companies are doing it, I will facilitate a process by which they unearth, like as a cross-functional team, what are the things that are getting in the way of customer obsession and what can we do about it? So what's unique about DoorDash, for example, is that they're a three-sided marketplace. You have the customer, you have the dasher, and you have the restaurant. And so it turns out that three-sided marketplace made it incredibly difficult to be customer obsessed because everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else. And there were definitely issues around empowerment and organizational accountability and just the way they operated to that, they had to work through as a team to get talking about it and then figure out, well, what should be the better protocol. And then nothing more powerful than having an engineer say, maybe we should slow down our launches to make sure that we have quality right. Would help a lot. I mean, that is just gold because like if I told them you need to slow down your launches in order to get quality right, first of all, I don't have any visibility into that. But second of all, like, if I say it, it's one thing, but for an engineer inside the company to say it, that means that they're actually going to implement those changes.
I've seen plenty of incidents where the CTO has actually said like, I've got headcount for hiring new engineers, but I actually want to redirect that to design because the bottleneck is all the stuff that design does, and it's not necessarily an engineering problem. So the other thing I was going to say was, I think you've just, when you were saying like how people come to you, I mean, again, that's my experience as well. Normally people reach out to me initially because they're hiring a designer or a product leader or some other kind of role, and they want me to kind of look over their job description or their a list of resumes, or maybe step in and kind of do some interviewing for them. And once they build up confidence with me, then they might start asking me smaller questions. And then if I add value, then they ask me deeper and deeper questions. And so usually it's just a slow kind of warming up until, if you're delivering so much value, then people will start kind of asking you questions that kind of are all over the place. And so these days, like, I start from a design perspective, but a lot of the stuff I end up helping people with is, like you said, around kind of company culture and, business development and kind of like, obviously, a whole bunch of stuff in product. I'm curious, a big part of what I do as well, and I don't know if it's something that you touch on, I think that design has a big part to play in finding product market fit and finding new customers. A lot of the problem early stage companies have are with things with churn, onboarding, discovery, getting value quick enough from the product, having people kind of like bake behaviors into their daily workflow so they kind of choose this tool over kind of like going back to the old way of solving things. So is growth a part of like what people consult you about?
They can, and it has happened. And one example is like a portfolio company, Rubric. They found that they were sitting on a lot of data that meant that, because of the business that they were in, but because they were collecting all of this data from their customers, there was an opportunity to create an entirely different kind of product based on the data that was being collected. But they needed some help with like just conceiving it, just having an early prototype to test against it and show to their customers, like, would this be an interesting add-on product for the service that you're already getting from us? And so that was an opportunity to kind of teach them how to run a design sprint and come up with like different conceptual ideas, how to prototype it quickly, how to test it in front of their customers to gauge the interest. And ultimately, it turned into a real product that is being sold now. So, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
One of the things I really love about being a VC, well, two things actually. First of all, I get to learn about a whole bunch of new industries that I've never kind of experienced. Like, you're constantly discovering new ideas, new pockets of the world that you haven't kind of experienced before. You have to become an expert at really quickly. I think the other thing is often you're at the cutting edge of what's coming down the line. So you're seeing products, ideas, technology which aren't mainstream today, but might be mainstream in 5 or 10 years' time. I'm just curious, what's exciting you about the world of technology and startups over the next 5 years? And also, what, if anything, is concerning you?
I think there's a lot of interesting activity going on in the healthcare and health tech kind of space. A lot of new interesting companies that are putting the opportunity in the hands of consumers to scan their bodies or test their blood or assess the biological clock of their organs or whatever, X, Y, and Z, so that people can understand what's going on in their bodies and take personal responsibility for their health. And there is an incredible opportunity here, not only because these services have never been provided before, but also because there's an epidemic of chronic illness, at least in the United States. And people are finding that Western or allopathic medicine is only tells part of the story and is incredibly helpful for acute problems, like if you need antibiotics for something, or if you have a broken bone, or whatever. But for more complex chronic issues, it's not necessarily a direct linear path to wellness. So I think there are a lot of interesting and exciting developments in this space. In terms of what concerns me, I think that there's so many things. Like, I talked to one startup that was like, we're building this tech that's going to put a lot of people out of jobs and we're going to make a lot of money. And, that to me is not necessarily the most inspiring or motivating vision for me personally to work on. Similarly, a company that aims to solve the problem of human loneliness by offering a chatbot that people can talk to, I also don't think is really addressing the root cause and may only serve to further alienate lonely people from society. So those are cases in which I personally would take a different approach and would prefer to see solutions that are entirely different. But, I think it reflects larger societal, it reflects several larger societal issues at play. People are increasingly isolated from each other. AI is taking over jobs. So what are people going to do? I see this firsthand in the next generation, in the Gen Z folks. I have two daughters who are Generation Z, and all my friends' kids are Gen Z. And so many of them are having trouble finding employment, for example. And then similarly, I also see like the rage that so many people exhibit, the inability to connect with other people. Like, it used to be that just interacting with people in person-to-person businesses would require you to make small talk and it would force you to reconnect with your sense of humanity. And now it's like you can go the whole day without talking to anybody. You go to the grocery store, it's like self-checkout. You need to deal with the bank or an airline. You are dealing with like interactive voice response or, chatbot or whatever. So people don't know how to make small talk anymore. And I think that's actually to the detriment of humanity. And so they're just like micro interactions like that we've taken for granted that have these enormous ripple effects on how we relate to each other as human beings that I think are incredibly distressing and harmful.
It's a challenge, isn't it? If you're in that space as a VC, you're dealing with a whole range of different companies. If you are a partner that's investing, you're making decisions all the time. Some of them around ethics, some around the shape of the future of the world that you're helping to manifest or not. And so it can be quite a sort of a challenging space to work in. I agree with everything you've said, both in terms of the opportunities with health, but also the sense of disconnection. And particularly, I think a lot of people are arguably, understandably, correctly worried about the effect that some of the technologies we're seeing now are going to have on the workplace, both the volume of jobs available and the quality of jobs. And so I think we are moving to a really interesting, challenging, turbulent time. And so, yeah, everything you said sort of resonated with me there. I'm curious, is there something that really surprised you about the world of venture coming from the world of design? And what have you really loved about the world of venture and what would you change, if anything?
Well, what I have really enjoyed about working in venture capital is I used to joke is like all the things I loved about working at Google and Yahoo and Udacity and Netscape without any of the things that I didn't enjoy. So, for instance, I get to work with really creative, smart, interesting people who are aiming to take on some hard problems. That is super fun. Because there's flexible thinking, there's a growth mindset, there's a curiosity that's fueling all these people that I have the privilege of working with. And alongside that, I don't get to take home any of the operating stress, which is great. So being in the liminal space is really wonderful because I can actually see things more clearly because I'm not personally invested in the emotional dramas that take place in the workplace that so often happens. I don't have to write 100 performance reviews like I used to when I was at Google. So those are all really wonderful things.
Just jumping in there, I'm absolutely in exactly the same space as you. Before I got into VC, I worked in the agency space. And so I had lots of clients to deal with. I had lots of customers and lots of staff members to deal with. And all of that stuff kind of had a real direct impact on me, my happiness, my livelihood, the livelihood of the team. And so it kind of weighs down. And I really like the ability to talk to lots of amazing founders, to get inspired by, really young, sharp, creative people. But I don't have to take any of that kind of burden home. That actually, and because I don't have to take any of that burden home, I can actually assess things in a slightly more sort of measured way, not through a stress response, not out of fear, but just out of kind of like an external observer looking at the problem. So the fact that you said that, I really love that because that's exactly where I sit as well. Anything that you've been sort of surprised about or kind of not so keen about the world of VC? Because I guess VC gets a bit of a hard time at times.
There hasn't been anything I don't like about working in venture capital. I think that's why I've been there for about a dozen years now. I will say that it's not for everyone. It's not the kind of move that builds your resume or builds a career. I think it's very hard to go back into an operating role after you have a time in venture capital, because unless you're directly making and building and contributing to your portfolio, it's just hard to go anywhere else. I mean, I give this advice to people all the time when they think about, oh, how do I, work in venture capital? It's like, well, if you're kind of post-career or near the end of your career, this is a great last step before you ride off into the sunset. But if you still have some, juice in you, like make hay while the sun is shining. Like go go be an operator, go work inside a company or an agency or freelancer, be hands-on for as long as you can, because, you don't know, like, I think for every move that you make in your career, you should always be asking yourself, like, what can I learn from this next step that's going to make me a different or better person coming out on the other side? And what kind of opportunities will that open up for me? And if you can't answer that, post your stint in VC, then or any stint that you take on, then you should give it another thought as to whether it's really the right move.
I mean, I think being a VC can be a bit of a career cul-de-sac if you've been an operator, because I think, like you say, it's quite hard to come back after 3, 4, 5, 6 years and then go into another large tech company and kind of feel like you've still got your finger on the pulse. And I think skills atrophy is real. I think a lot of the time, I know that my skills have definitely atrophied a little bit, and I think my network has atrophied a little bit. And so also I'm probably exactly that kind of person that you described, which is kind of, my career isn't quite at the end yet, but I'm kind of like in a sort of a transitionary space where I can use all the stuff that I've learned over the last 20, 30 years and pay it forward to that kind of next generation. And I get a huge amount of satisfaction being able to help 20 or 30 founders rather than just sort of, one company or 4 or 5 clients. I think the one thing that a lot of people don't appreciate, actually, which can be tough, and like you say, because you're more of an operating person than an investor, I think it can be really hard kind of like turning people down constantly. Your job as an investor is saying no 90% of the time. I actually spend a lot of my time when people reach out to me asking for investment advice, telling them or trying to convince them not to take VC money, because often, if you want to build a lovely 5 million, 10 million, 20 million a year business, like that's great, but VC is going to kill that business because they're looking for $100 million, $1 billion kind of outcomes. And so a lot of my time is spent trying to talk people off the ledge, or sadly, like seeing people who, if I had tons of money, would love to support them because they're doing something really good, good and worthwhile. But it just doesn't sort of fit the kind of the venture model of these kind of like 100x, 1000x returns. And so, seeing people that you love the idea and you wish it would exist, it just doesn't make sense as a business, can be kind of tough. We're sort of coming to the end of our time. I've really enjoyed sort of chatting with you. I'm just curious, like, where are things now and what's next for you?
Oh, well, it's funny you should ask. I've actually been plotting my wind down from venture capital, at least at Khosla Ventures. I often joke that as the world turns to artificial intelligence, I'm turning more and more towards natural intelligence, which kind of encompasses a whole array of interesting things that I find fascinating. I don't think of this as retirement. Somebody coined a term for me last week that they called it preferment. It's like you're doing the things that you prefer to do. I also think along with that come the ability to engage in like beauty and art, which I think are so incredibly healing, music. So I've always had a keen interest in that, but never really had the freedom or the permission or the means to explore that and engage in that. So that will also be part of my future, I hope.
Wow. Well, I mean, this has been amazing. I've loved chatting to you. You've had 2 really fantastic, interesting, different careers so far, one in design leadership and then one in VC. And it sounds like you're going to be exploring a whole interesting new world of kind of wellness and health and And yeah, that sounds really exciting. So thank you so much for sharing. It's been really, really fun. I was going to ask kind of like what's bringing you joy at the moment, but it sounds like that is tied in with what you've just said, kind of nature and mindfulness and kind of being on your health journey. So anything else kind of really bringing you joy at the moment, or?
Well, I'm just wrapping up construction on my third construction project. So this is super exciting, and I'm looking forward to spending more time in nature once it's done. So yeah, lots of things to be excited about, but that's just one of many.
Oh, amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us, Irene. It's been a pleasure chatting to you. If people want to sort of like follow you, are you on social media? Is that a thing that you're interested in, or is your kind of your next phase going to be cutting yourself off from that world?
Yeah. I think in this day and age, privacy is a luxury item. And I'm pleased to say I think I have the luxury of being a little private. I've been off social media for quite some time, off of Facebook, off of Instagram. I still have an account, but I'm not really looking at it. I am on LinkedIn, but we'll probably be looking at it less and less. I did just push out a redesign of my own personal website. So it's ireneau.com. And that's where I will probably be sharing things that I find interesting to the extent that I want to share. But that's also an ability, there's also a place where people can, book a meeting with me or send me messages too. So if they want to connect directly, they can go there.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much, Irene. It's been a pleasure. And thanks to all of you who've been listening to the Design VC. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share it with any founders or founding designers or other people in the kind of VC world you think might be, find it interesting. And until next time, I'm Andy Budd, and this has been the Design VC.